Great news for the EThames community. Startup Ready is launching at the EThames Business School campus in Gachibowli through a creative play workshop. And joining us for a conversation about this is Vishal and Benjamin. So let's begin with your story.
Sure, Satya. What background, origin story?
Absolutely. So from Deloitte to where you are, you've been a globe trotter. Tell us, how did this Startup Ready come about?
Cool. Okay, personal story. I'll give you a very quick summary. I grew up in Hyderabad, born to doctors, so first generation entrepreneur, but that started later. I did my engineering here, schooling here. Joined Deloitte. It's one of the earliest campuses. Those days, 2005, Deloitte had 400 people. Could have 40,000 people. So my first job was Deloitte and then IBM. So 5 years in Big Five Consulting. I'd always wanted to begin my entrepreneurial journey, and I did after the 5 years, the sixth year. And my entrepreneurial pursuits took me to different continents, Africa, US, UK, a lot in India as well, all the major cities. And it also took me to various sectors, an extremely diverse range of sectors, because I didn't have an anchor, I didn't have a background. I did have a startup in healthcare too, because my parents are doctors. But then I went to agriculture, into publishing, luxury retail, most recent technology. So I think I developed a view, a way of inventing things in a particular container, a sector or subject or a knowledge base, and trying infinite things to hustle and survive and, keep the startup alive or shift from one startup to the other or get investment here or someone else there. If there's a trick in the book, I've tried it. Yeah, because I guess I had to prove to my world and my community that I could be a successful entrepreneur. So I think all this experience, this variety of experiences, helped me develop an objective, clear, scientific view of entrepreneurship. If you can learn a skill and transform that skill into a tangible example that people can easily adopt and find valuable, and all this within like a container that we can define, that view, that understanding was the origin of entrepreneurship, I guess. That was the initial thought. And then started the journey of defining what it is, starting with a vision, starting with an assumption, and, building the knowledge base. I'd love to share if like to.
Very well. Benjamin, I won't use the word eccentric, but you had a very unusual journey.
Very much so.
So let's understand your story from being an expressive arts therapist to where you are.
Well, funnily enough, I didn't even expect to end up in any of these realms. I started off as a writer, actually, born to two professors of art history in London. Then I had 12 years experience as a yoga instructor, but that ultimately proved quite unfulfilling, because what yoga requires is real dedication, consistent dedication. And that's something that I found with, unfortunately, very few students. So it was quite unfulfilling in that way. It was quite short-term bursts of very excited energy when you're holding classes of 60 plus people, for example. But I didn't feel there was much progression in my own professional pursuits. So after hitting a kind of ceiling, right? But then I still had this urge to be of service in one way or another. That was always something very important to me. And I was living in India. I've been living in India since 2020, since the lockdown. I didn't really know where to take myself or what to do. I had all these passions of writing, music, pottery, yoga, and I wanted something to bring it all together. And it all came together with expressive arts, right? And as soon as someone said this to me, intermodal expressive arts therapy is the full name, but I won't refer to it as that from henceforth. And it truly has. It's brought together all of my passions, and it's come in the form of something that is of service to individuals and communities alike. And we'll go into more depth into how that came about. But then Vishal came about.
That's the answer.
And we met in a festival where we were both working on the fire team, where we were keeping these fires going throughout the course of the festival. And it was a very random encounter, I would say. I come from also a background where I considered myself very without a aptitude for business, right? I didn't even have the word entrepreneurship or in my vocabulary. Vishal took me in. He started to give me more insight into a more, this very holistic and intuitive approach, which we'll also go into greater depth. And then Vishal started to see that there was opportunity to bring my offering into his offering as a part of his structure. And we've been working together ever since, which is about 2 years now, a little bit more. And it's a very nourishing relationship, and it's given both more, there's a symbiosis in that. It's given more insight for me into how to approach my own entrepreneurial process, and also how my understanding of the arts, the therapeutic arts, has expanded to this very universal approach. Yeah.
Entrepreneurology, which is the science of entrepreneurship. That's a very fascinating lens to look at entrepreneurship. How did the concept come to you?
Thank you for calling it a lens, because that's exactly what it is. It is something through which you view your world and your journey, which provides absolute objectivity and clarity for what it is. How did it turn up? Well, the name itself was an idea coined, put together, but the whole origin was in the study and the application of the scientific method. When we had the vision that entrepreneurs will be successful. Our vision is entrepreneurs don't fail, startups don't fail. Yeah. And just to be light on people, they're like, okay, a world where entrepreneurship is incredibly successful, because people think we are conning them if we say don't fail, but the science will ensure that you just don't fail. So we are talking about something truly radical. We're saying currently 90 to 99% based on who's researching of startups fail, to you just don't fail. Yes. And if you don't want anything to fail, you develop a process, a way of doing things by applying the scientific method. From philosophers like Aristotle to Plato, they applied scientific method to invent things. But even the universe, the world as a consciousness, applies the scientific method. From the particles in the space to form the Earth's core, to the the layers in the Earth's core, to the atmosphere. Every step, there's a consciousness about between things or particles or living organisms later, there is a consciousness creating an assumption of what will happen if two things come together in a certain environment. And then you try that assumption as an experiment, and then you develop knowledge. Oh, if you do this, then this happens. Yeah. From the planet to, single-celled organisms to multiple cells to humans, from, amphibians to, everything else. The evolution followed the scientific method. So after deep study of that method, we apply the scientific method to entrepreneurship to develop this knowledge base. If we want entrepreneurship to be 100% successful, then let's develop the language and the knowledge and the process for it. That is the origin. And hence, like every other science, ology describes the science, the suffix entrepreneur, we put both of them together and call it entrepreneurology. Is the full version. It's a bit of a mouthful, even to me in the initial days. So entrepreneurology, like you're saying, Satya, perfectly, is a shorter, more accessible way to pronounce it. It is the science of entrepreneurship. It is the science of being an entrepreneur, because it is about the being. One of the elements that Benjamin brings to the space is how to be an entrepreneur. How do you feel? How do you think? How do you play? It's just not about reading a book. Yes, it is embodiment of the nature of being an entrepreneur.
And also in a sense, just how to be as an extension, because there's what we argue is that there's also not that much difference from yourself, your identity as an entrepreneur, to your identity as a being, in yourself, right? So the word here is authenticity, right? So your expression of your entrepreneurial identity being an extension of your authentic being. So that's one of the ways that the arts comes in, so that we can drop deeper and deeper into our authentic self-expression, right? Just shedding the layers of artifice, the layers that don't serve, of preconditions, right? And coming closer to that authentic self, and then that coming through in the way that we behave as our entrepreneurial identities, and then how that manifests in our offering, in what we bring into the world, right?
Yeah, true. How this works, like all of these things together, is you have the science, which tells you what to do. I mean, the simplest way to define science is how things work. A science is knowledge that can be demonstrated. Okay. But no matter how much you read, beautiful library here in your school, so many books on different subjects, no matter what you read, if you're not operating within the space of authenticity, which we call awareness, and in the space of being creative in a playful manner, you cannot adopt and follow the science. Yes, so entrepreneurship is the science on the top, if we see it as a triangle. On one side, it's awareness. The third edge is creative play. So everything that we do operates within this container. When we say, hey, now we're being an entrepreneur. I was just being a father, I was playing with my kid. Now I need to be an entrepreneur. Then you visualize that you're going into this space, into this triangle with these very clear boundaries. If I'm not being objective, if I don't have integrity, if I'm not being creative, if I'm not able to play, then I cannot manifest my vision. I cannot become an entrepreneur. I'm not being an entrepreneur. How can I take decisions by not being an entrepreneur and expect the outcome of entrepreneurship? Yes, so this boundaries is what's really important. And whatever we do, Startup Ready is an offering within these boundaries. Yes, every tangible example of this vision will work within these boundaries.
So if I were to take this a little further, and let's move from a panoramic to a ground level view. How do you bridge the gap between the theory and the practice of of entrepreneurship? And there's a world of difference. How do you bridge this?
There's theory and practice in the science, like any science, yes, because you need to understand the philosophy behind something, and the practice is the process. Um, let's go to the same analogy. We said triangle. You operate within the triangle: science, awareness, and creative play. Within this triangle is the actual work. Okay, so now imagine a sphere in the triangle, a circle. All of an entrepreneur's work happens within this sphere, within that universe. In that universe, you start with the vision. The definition of that sphere, the circle, is the vision. One of the core principles of entrepreneurship is the vision. How do you define a world? How do you declare a world where your offerings are possible? You're imagining a world that doesn't exist today. We start with the vision, and then we define the various strategic paths that can be taken to achieve that vision. And then you have ideas. Many people just start with ideas. Most of us just start with ideas. So this framework of entrepreneurship has very specific definitions of what a vision is. Unlike any other definition you have seen, I guarantee you, we're not doing the teachings here, but there's a whole chapter and lesson on vision itself in entrepreneurship in Startup Ready. Understanding what each of these terms mean, the relationship between these terms, and how they fit into a framework will help an entrepreneur objectively navigate their journey with absolute clarity. This is my vision, that 100 different paths to achieve this vision. I can place my ideas into each of these paths and see how it works. Ideas become experiments. When I run experiments, I discover what works and what doesn't work. And through this process of just learning and playing in the scope of my vision, within the boundaries of being aware and playful, yes, I will achieve, I will discover a valuable example of my vision. I will invent an offering that a certain group of people will certainly find valuable, undeniably valuable. So we operate within this space.
And I think part of your question is also around how do we take the theory into the real world, right? And I think that also requires a certain level of agency from the people who are participating. You know, we're in no way organization that can hold your hand and, you know, take you through every single step of your own process, because your process is also your own. But what we can do within this triangle is to provide the resources, and those resources, they're intentionally very digestible, right? So it's not huge epiphanic revelations or challenges, you know, more it's the really doable steps, that allow your process to unfold in its own time. You know, my dad grows orchids and he has a habit of shouting at them to make them grow faster. Tell you, it really doesn't work, right? And in that same way, we really see the offering, the outcome of the entrepreneur as an organism, as a living organism, like an orchid, right? And that needs to be given the space, the time, and the correct nourishment to flourish, to prosper, and to flower, right? So within that, that's why, yeah, there's an understanding of a living process here.
Yes.
That's also why there's this whole process of experimentation, feeding the data from the experimentation back into the offering, and allowing it to grow, right? So there's a constant innovation. This is why one of I think the first one on Tuesday, the first workshop that we'll be running,
It's called Unblocking Innovation.
is on unblocking innovation, you know, to help us identify the blocks that are in our way towards innovation, right? And that's where the play comes in. Innovation, play, experimentation, they all do hold within the same ecosystem, right? They play within, they play within the same mouth, you know.
I was thinking of a simple answer to Satya's question, the way you beautifully put it, the practice, the space where we hold people and nourish and guide them through the journey with simple bite-sized resources is startup ready.
That's startup ready.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what
It is a space.
Mhm.
Yes. The workshops we're having next week is just a funnel into the space for people to experience something in person, tangibly, but invited into this community or space that you call it. There'll be an app that they could download immediately and join the space, and they have access to all the resources and us and different type of study, learning, and practical programs and master classes to work with. We hold the space, and once people are into the space, they will navigate through the journey.
Exactly.
Well, I don't want to sound philosophical, but there is a beautiful observation about theory and practice. It said, theory without practice is dead, and practice without theory is blind. What you're doing is very beautifully blending both theory and practice. So I think you deserve a lot of applause for putting a program as effective as this together. Again, my follow-up question to this would be, what inspired you to dedicate your time to decoding the patterns behind successful entrepreneurship? There is definitely, having listened to both of you, there is a certain method to this so-called entrepreneurial madness. There is enough and more statistics to tell us a significant chunk, more than 96-97% of the entrepreneurial ventures do not survive beyond a year or two. And you've also spoken about the science. I would like to know, the entire the entire idea behind your journey to decode the patterns behind this?
Uh, my mind comes back to the scientific method. That was the approach used to develop this knowledge base. Yes. And maybe you're also asking about what motivated you. Yes. What was your, what poked you in the back to do this?
Quite a few things.
Yeah. I guess it was my own journey. Uh, most my entire adult life, I've strived to be an entrepreneur. I was being an entrepreneur. Most of the time, I was thinking I was being an entrepreneur, but if I see from the scientific lens, I wasn't truly being an entrepreneur. I was being a hustler, a leader, a politician. These are not entrepreneurs. When you hustle, you can't invent something. You just make something work temporarily. So my entire journey left with a sense of lack, a lack of fulfillment. My recent exit was in 2022 in London. And just after the exit, I don't know, maybe it was the nature of the exit and everything around it. Or maybe it's the first time I had a freaking pause in the last 20 years of my life. Again, if you're born to doctors, pauses are, dismissed. You'll be shamed if you pause for anything in your life. So I guess even between jobs, I never took a day's break. I think it's the first time in Kensington, around the parks out there, I got the time to challenge my entire journey. Okay, you've gotten here. What did you do? Yes, what you going to do next? The natural thing was, oh, you had an exit, now become a VC. The entrepreneur in me didn't want to become any VC. I wanted to create a structure for VCs, not the subjective selection and whatever happens in the market. It's a whole different subject. We talk about VCs and their lack of understanding of entrepreneurship is probably the biggest reason why startups fail. One of the biggest reasons. I started challenging my own journey. I created I created the narratives about the experiences. I defined the various experiences and I ran my assumptions through those experiences. Again, applying the scientific method. Okay, the assumptions in entrepreneurship. First assumption is people fail because they don't know entrepreneurship. Yeah, and all the other assumptions defining entrepreneurship and innovation and vision and mission and pivots and etc. etc. I ran all those assumptions through my own life because in the absence of experiments, you can use experiences. Experiences can replace experiments. But again, so my journey of, like I said, having all sorts of experiences possible in all sorts of situations because I was truly hustling and doing and trying to survive and win and prove myself. I had every experience possible. So when I documented these experiences and I ran my assumptions through these experiences, I guess it immensely accelerated the process because I didn't have to run and invest in these experiments. Yeah. That was the initial motivation, the background, the frustration and the experience and the strength that I had maybe now recently in my life to challenge my own journey. Not many of us, reach there, whatever the triggers were. Like, okay, I'm here, but I need to challenge this because only when you challenge, again, this is the scientific method, you challenge what you see, is the beginning of being curious. When you're curious, you challenge something, then you come up with an assumption of how else this could be, and then the journey of discovery starts. The assumption is run through an experience or an experiment, and you develop knowledge. So I guess I was practicing this way of being in my mind and my body. And it applies to every area of your life. It greatly improves how you feel like.
Do you have anything to add to that, Benjamin?
I really did. Your last does.
Like I said, I didn't have any acumen entrepreneurially, right, in advance of meeting Vishal. And I just want to add that really, I mean, coming from my kind of very, very right brain creative background, this does really have this universal application, right? if it speaks to me, I'm telling you, it can speak to anybody. And there was this during our kind of more coaching process, I suppose, which is still underway, of course, as a continuous process. There was a beautiful moment when Vishal started to describe where he saw Startup Ready going. And Startup Ready was completely constructed, of course, on the science that Vishal has laid out, on that foundation. So then to sit there, seeing all of the theory and that structure built into the very foundation of Startup Ready, and for me to understand it, was a bit of a mic drop moment, right? So it's all I want to say is that it is really very approachable, right? For me, it's not intimidating, right? And I surprised myself, in my own approach. I have my own practice beyond Startup Ready as well in the expressive arts, and I can really feel how the science is informing that and increasing that level of professionalism, which, builds a certain level of pride in me and gratitude, of course, to Vishal. So, yeah.
Can you share any early success stories that kind of validated your belief in this process?
In our work in entrepreneurship and the invention of Startup Ready, um, over 2,500 founders. We call them research and experiments, but from their perspective, there's real progress. Yeah. This research or experimentation is a view from which you view the experience so that you develop the knowledge from it. We measure success by them finding more clarity, feeling lighter, not burning resources without being able to measure the outcome in the most objective way, and manifesting their vision into tangible offerings. I think the best example here is Benjamin.
I was thinking the same. But
His skill in expressive art, which is his core skill, could be given to some of the early work in his training he mentioned is with refugees. No,
I'm being trained by someone who works in a approach to expressive arts that is trauma informed. This woman, Melinda Myers, she worked with refugees for 40 plus years and developed a system that builds safety so that they can move out of this kind of limbo state, right, into the present moment and then into a healthy future. So that's the approach that I'm currently being trained in. And although, this work isn't necessarily trauma based, but along with that, everyone does have trauma. Of course, the example of refugees is an extreme one. Nevertheless, we do all carry our own trauma in our own way. And as well as that, there's this pinnacle aspect of safety, right? We could all do with so much more safety in our lives, a sense of safety amidst the wild unpredictability that is this existence. Just a bit of that structure and predictability of safety to act as a kind of offset, as a kind of antidote to the rest of the chaos. Incredibly therapeutic, incredibly healing. So safety henceforth, since my training, has been the foundation for all the work that I do, and it's very much a part of the workshops that we'll be facilitating together.
What a cathartic experience it has been listening to you talk about some of these interventions. What is that one key differentiator, Vishal, that sets you apart from the others? Right? What is, if I were to put it in very simple terms, what is that USP, if I were to use the term?
Startup language.
Yep. So what's that USP? What's that value proposition that sets you apart from the others?
Entrepreneurship. Sorry, not yes. Entrepreneurship itself. The how you define and talk about entrepreneurship itself is the core differentiating factor. It is unlike anything else that you see. And this has been part of our research. Most curriculum on entrepreneurship is essentially concepts from the business world superficially applied to startups. And that's why they fail. And this is taught research in all the major institutes of the world. The first few months has been that, the starting of entrepreneurship. The language of entrepreneurship, the definition, the depth of what entrepreneurship is the core differentiating factor. But add to that the practice of awareness and the practice of creative play. Without, yes, these two elements, safety, a word that Benjamin just used. Where are you able to practice entrepreneurship in a safe space today? Nowhere. You're not safe in your home, in any cohort, any incubator that you're with. Yes. And ultimately, you're not safe within yourself because you're constantly asked to win, figure out how things work versus not having the approach to discover in a scientific, objective way. Yes, this is a safe space. Startup Ready is defined as, how do we put it, the caption? Master the science of entrepreneurship through awareness and creative play. Says it all. That's our value proposition.
Yeah. Just to add onto safety, in an environment like a workshop, a class, a learning experience generally, if we don't feel safe, then we have our guard up, right? When we have our guard up and there's tension physically in the body, then we can't drop in. We can't relax into what we're receiving, and also we can't relax into what is arising within us. So this is where it gets quite holistic, esoteric in a way. But my hypothesis within expressive arts, using the language, is that we already know what is right for us, okay? And what we need. We know the direction that we need to take. Right? We always think that we need to go for advice here, there, and everywhere. That's because there's a lot of mind in the way of the body. The body knows, right? And so that's why in these practices, using the arts through movement, writing, visual art, generally expression, we come closer to that knowing, that intuitive knowing, right? One-on-one clients always ask me, what should I do? It's like, they go through a process, whatever that process might be, specific to them in the one-on-one work. And by the end, they know. And one of my great pleasures is just listening to the wisdom that emerges from the clients and from the participants. It stuns me. I listen in rapture because I learn, and everybody contains so much wisdom and so much knowing. And in a group setting like the one that we'll be facilitating, everyone is learning from everyone. Yeah. Right? So there's really that space once they drop in for that wisdom to rise up. Because another thing that's worth mentioning is that though we are making art, it's so much less about the art that we make in itself. Of course, there are nice things to take home, but it's about what the process of art making brings about with you. Okay? That's where the magic happens. You drop into making art in a conscious and authentic state, and that's when the borders, the tension start to dissolve, and that's when the knowing starts to emerge, right, and unfold. And it is an honor to be a part of it, and it's an honor to bring it into this context, which feels very relevant today, especially as AI is taking over so many professions. Unemployment is a great fear, and so people will need to innovate and become entrepreneurs to create something for themselves. So entrepreneurship and what Vishal is offering is very relevant, more so than ever.
Well, in an AI-fueled, disruptive world, one can rest assured that socio-emotional skills right? Resilience, communication skills, interpersonal communication, emotional intelligence. These are going to be at a premium. And very happy that you are focusing on all these aspects. Finally, both of you have been widely traveled. You've seen entrepreneurial ecosystems across the world. If you could share some views of yours on the difference between some of the ecosystems across the world and in India.
Thank you for that question. I think the best way to answer this is declare or point out the similarities in all the ecosystem. Entrepreneurship is everywhere. What people in India are doing are emulating what's being done abroad. Yes. The problem is the same. The gap is the same. The misunderstanding is the same. Entrepreneurship is not seen as something to learn and do. It is most often associated with the sense of heroism. You know what I'm saying? That's what constantly came back in our experiments. Constantly. Most people jump into entrepreneurship thinking they will emerge as heroes, or they already feel like heroes jumping into something that has never been done before. Mm? And this this role or archetype of heroism is something that we're very well conditioned with growing up in every story that we read. And the consequence of that is every entrepreneurial story, success story, is projected of winning, of heroism, of a positive outcome. So everything that you read about entrepreneurship, especially in the press, the storytelling, our stories are made to entertain people, to keep them hooked. And when you tell a story for the sake of storytelling, you never ever get into the depth of what the actual journey was. That knowledge is not existent. Yes, that is a common problem everywhere. I'm not getting the culture into it yet, but the understanding of entrepreneurship and the way people get into the journey, that is the problem. Entrepreneurship is a scientific journey. Learn the science before the scientific journey. Yeah, would you just go into space without learning about space? Would you become an engineer without learning engineering? Why not entrepreneurship? Why is entrepreneurship not seen with that lens? And we started seeing it with that lens. And just by seeing it with that lens and following and approaching with a process, we developed this knowledge base, and now we're ready to share with others.